And so the theme of the restoration very much becomes this idea of Western learning for Eastern use. So not only is it a restoration of the emperor and very much of the glory days of Japan's golden era in, say, the Han Dynasty, when the emperor actually had political control, but Japan's also going to be introducing a lot of not only Western technology, but Western ideas in terms of government, in terms of how society should run. There are definitely still Japanese influences, and they are going to remain. The idea of having multiple wives, a lot of Japanese culture is definitely still going to be retained. And it's not too difficult to do so because a lot of the Western nations are very much entranced by Eastern culture. They find it very, very fascinating, very beautiful. And so, they're definitely paying heed to this. But there's also an acknowledgement in Japan that it's not just railroads and not just factories. There's everything else in terms of infrastructure that has to be done. And so there are a number of high government officials and high scholars that go abroad to the United States, to Japan, to Belgium, to Germany, to France. And they're going to schools and they're going to factories. And they're inviting industrialists to come abroad to Japan. They're inviting teachers and scholars to come to Japan and say, okay, look, teach us what's going on. Teach us exactly what it is that we need to know. And so, while they definitely do try to retain some of their roots, they definitely acknowledge that you can't just have Western stuff here and try to ignore certain elements of it. You're going to have to understand the Western education, the Western thought process, and how Western society works if these other changes, this industrial change, is actually going to take root. And so you're going to have to bring in Western schools and Western education in order to train up the next generation so they can really continue. So they're definitely far more liberal with incorporating elements of Western ideology than a lot of future Asian nations, namely China. And there's a lot of comparisons. For example, the Zaibutsu, the financial cliques, very similar to the cartels or the monopolies in the West. The government's taking a very strong role in this and really trying to jumpstart Japan's industry and Japan's transformation, and then turning it over to private citizens. So Japan is definitely aware of the risk it's going to fall into if it does not industrialize. That if it doesn't do so now, they're going to run the risk of always having this foreign intervention over them. And they're definitely aware, continuously aware of this difference between them and the West. Because while occasionally the West will speak very favorably of Japanese, of how bright they are, of how industrious they are, there's definitely a significant element of racism that's going to be coloring interactions between the West and the Japanese. Now, what we're going to be seeing here is really the echoes of future imperialism, Western expansion of territory and resources. Now, Japan was nearly a victim of this, but they learned how to play the West game for their own self preservation. Now we're going to be looking at the development of the American nations. And many of the themes that we've discussed in this lecture we're going to see echoed in the Americas.